Zach Mobius, welcome to the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. What's up, man?
Ben, thank you for having me, man. Pretty pumped to give the listeners some value. Just got done with a workout, sipping my protein shake, 2-to-1, carbs to
Carbs
protein.
to protein. Do you use branch cyclic dextrins or what do you use in just juice?
No, a big fan of branch cyclic dextrins, actually. I don't know if they're like entirely the hype that they give. Like they're
Sure.
really easy on my stomach.
Yeah, man. So I'm super excited to have the opportunity to have you on to share your wisdom and insight with our listeners. You kind of have a different background than a lot of the health and nutrition and fitness experts that I have on the show. So I think it's only logical that we start at the beginning and just give us a very brief background around kind of where you came from and
Mhm.
what it is that you've been doing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I would say it's not the traditional path of like work in a gym and or kind of like start right away or have a background in exercise phase. I think my path was very much going headstrong into the corporate world and then kind of looking back at my past and feeling like I wasn't really fulfilling my potential. So when I was 13, I had viral meningitis, which is the inflammation of the meninges in your brain. No idea where it came from, but I woke up on December 27th, felt perfectly fine the next or the day before, and really fell off. Went to the pediatrician, and then on my way to the pediatrician to the first hospital, had a grand mal seizure,
Mm.
coded, was rushed to Children's Hospital in San Diego. And according to my mom, it's like straight out of a scene in the ER where like the mother's being pried off of the kid. She's kind of stuck at the doors and the kid's being rolled to the gurney. So flash forward a few minutes, like my heart had stopped. I got brought back with defibrillators and woke up 2 days later with a scar on my hand, a pounding headache, and then pulling 5 IVs out of my hand. And ever since then, I've kind of had, I think, a different relationship with health. And when I got into the corporate world, I looked at what I was doing. I worked for Uber Eats, doing global strategy work, and was doing some really cool stuff. Tons of stuff around product and strategy. But I kind of looked at what I was doing in my day to day. I just had to ask myself, like, is this really fulfilling the reason that I'm here, the second chance that I got at life, and how can
Mm.
I take what I've learned because I've always been kind of a student of the game with nutrition and training and really help other people. And that's kind of how it started my coaching journey. And then from there, it just kind of dovetailed into helping coaches because when I looked around at the coaches, I was having problems managing clients. And there were a ton of really good coaches who knew everything they needed to know about macros, training, et cetera, but like were really struggling on the client management side. So I kind of looked at how could I give the people helping people better tools to make an impact so they could really do the work that they were meant to do
Yeah.
and could do so at a scale that would be impactful to a lot of people.
Awesome. That's amazing. Now, what was it that, and I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think so many of us have some sort of health journey that we had to overcome, health struggle that we had to overcome, which is why we do what we do. Let me ask, what were the skills that you developed throughout your corporate life that have helped you from making the transition into health and fitness world, and we'll go more into exactly what it is that you're doing in the health and fitness world. But what were those main skills that you developed that you're imparting to other coaches and clients?
So I think a lot of the skills center around problem solving. So I think that like I've always said that like coaches are these expert problem solvers and they just use the body as kind of like their toolkit to solve problems. So what was so foundational about Uber is the company was moving so fast and growing so fast that like if you weren't constantly problem solving of like where's the biggest bottleneck, where do we go next, like how are we on track to make progress, it was really easy to get lost. And when I look at coaches doing that, like their problem solving toolkit is all the information they have at them with the human body. Like,
Yeah.
how is this person's compliance doing? Like, how is their biofeedback moving? Like stress, sleep, energy, mood, and focus, all the stuff that I'm sure you talk at nauseum about here and other coaches do as well. How do you kind of put those pieces together and kind of like look at everything you have in front of you to tell a clearer picture to know what to do next?
Yeah.
Because I think that's what like a lot of tech driven, especially startups, like they're very known for being very data driven. And it's because you have to be. You have to look at the picture, make an 80% decision, and then take that next step forward. And then when I looked at like how to help coaches, it was very much in that same vein. Like, how do you take all of these inputs that are either disparate or hard to get people to record and put them in front of the coach so they can say, okay, like I can make a better decision this week
Hmm.
to put my client in the best position to succeed. Because like that's all we're doing as coaches. We're just taking one step in front of the other and really trying to put the client in the spotlight to get results and like drive towards their end goal.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the struggles that I think so many of us coaches have is we've spent years and years working with clients, and we become hopefully very good at identifying those said problems that you
Mhm.
mentioned. Um, and knowing how to overcome those problems, and knowing what those solutions are. But when you try and scale that, it becomes very seemingly complex depending
Mhm.
on how many clients you have. Is yes, we are good problem solvers, but when we start to have 50 or 75 or 100 or more clients, it becomes a situation of how do I realistically start to manage all of these problems and give the client the tools that they need to continue to make progress
Yeah.
without basically getting in our own way. And so what I appreciate is how you've helped me at least, and I know you've helped a lot of other coaches really start to systematize that process and how to start to think about identifying and utilizing feedback as a tool to determine what needs to change next. How do we keep moving the needle? Now,
Mhm.
with that said, I'd like to take just a small step back and talk to the general population around kind of why it's so important. And we can even speak to just a goal setting, even just a business growth standpoint, even just a personal
Yeah.
professional growth standpoint as to how and why it's so important for us to be leveraging metrics in our day to day to help us make progress.
Yeah. Well, I think like let's just talk to the general population. We can scale from there. And I
Yeah.
like that you say like metrics. They're not metric because I think one of the big issues in health and fitness that's been going on for a while is the sole focus on one thing.
Hmm.
Well, it's important to have kind of like a guiding light when you're only focused on the scale, for example, and like that's your measuring stick for everything. It can get very
Right.
discouraging for not making progress. And I guess like if you take a step back even further, metrics are really important because they allow us to see how we're progressing toward our goal. And in order for the coach to give feedback, in order for you as the client to be motivated, you have to understand kind of like where you're at in accordance to where you want to be. And the easiest way to do that is to measure a certain subset of things to evaluate progress. From the coaching side, this is great because it allows the coach to make better decisions. But from the client side, the most important reason to track is so that you know where you're at all times and the journey stays really motivating.
Hmm.
Um, Client transformation, like it can be very difficult. And I think one of the things that makes it so difficult is if you feel like you're not making progress towards your goal. I've done more research on churn than just about anyone I know because all day we had an Uber. And my thesis really came down to this, like churn happens, like you kind of give up on the process if your expectations of progress and like your rate of perceived like progress towards your goal are not being met.
Right.
So from a client standpoint, like if you don't feel like you're making progress, like I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to quit because it feels like very tiring day after day to be working at something and not seeing the things that you care about move. But if you're tracking things that are kind of in accordance with that goal, it allows you to see things that are moving outside of just the one sole metric and you can start to key in on different things. So as the client, like you always feel like you're winning. And like if you always feel like you're winning, that dopamine's high, that drive is high, and you're more likely to continue on the journey and drive towards harder and harder things.
Yeah, I think that was very well expressed. And what resonated with me and what you just said is the importance of, first of all, setting realistic expectations. Or I don't even know if you said realistic expectations, but I said realistic expectations. You said, where are they starting from? What are their expectations? And making sure that their expectations don't outweigh
Mm-hmm.
basically their rate of perceived progress. And so it's up to us as the coach, to me as the coach, to our listeners who are coaches to say, here's what realistic expectations should look like in
Mm-hmm.
line with your goal. And here's the metrics that we leverage to help dictate what that progress is looking like, whether it's scale weight, whether it's circumference measurements, whether it's energy levels, whether it's digestive health, whether it's sleep, right? All of these metrics that we
Mm-hmm.
speak of. That way, the client and the coach are in communication and on the same page as to what progress markers they should be leveraging to dictate the success.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. I think that's totally spot on. And like the easiest analogy I can make for this is like imagine we're in a car right now. You don't just have one thing to look at. If all you had was your speedometer,
Right.
that's great. You can tell how fast you're going, but do you have maps up? Like, where are you going? Like, how much more time do you have to get to your goal? Because if you're going 100 miles an hour and you're trying to get to somewhere that's 100 miles away, you're going to get there in an hour.
Yeah.
But if you're going 100 miles an hour and you're trying to go from New York to California, like, even though you're going very, very fast for the car, it's going to take a long time to get there. And just like speed, like, you want to know like everything else on the dashboard. Like, does the oil need change? Like, what are your RPMs? Like, are there any other kind of like red lights or brake lights on, or kind of check engine, so you know kind of what's going on? And like, it parlays so well to the body, because I think so often we just look at weight, like I was saying, as the primary metric of like, is scale weight moving up or down? But that tells like one very small piece of the story. Like, that's the speedometer in the dash of the car. But if you have the check engine light on, the oil light on, the repair brakes light on, everything else is like red, but you're still kind of like mainline the gas, like, it doesn't matter how fast you press down, like, the car is eventually going to break down. So just like, if you're only focused on the scale and you're not looking at like how your sleep is, how your energy is, how your focus is, and all the other pieces that coaches play with to understand kind of like where someone is according to where they want to be, it's really hard to understand like what the next step is. And if you don't understand where the next step is, like, you don't understand how to get there.
Yeah. 100%. Why do you think it's so challenging for so many people to actually acknowledge that they need to be cognizant of metrics, right? And for me, I guess it's something that I wasn't necessarily brought up or taught that, even like that I need to be good with budgeting, like for my bank account and our expenses and all of these types of things. And I think it has a direct correlation to, managing and budgeting for other things in our life, like our calories and our intake and all of that kind of stuff. But what have your observations been as far as perhaps resistance from people as to the need to track these metrics that we're talking about?
Yeah, well, I think that the resistance really comes from the dark side of it. If you understand your rate of progress towards something and where you stand, it's awesome. You feel great if you're moving towards your goal. It doesn't feel so good if your metrics are moving in the wrong direction. So just like finances for a lot of people, where it's really easy to turn a blind eye, and like, unless like, if you have a job and you're kind of doing the basic things, like, you're probably not going to bankrupt yourself overnight. But like, over time, like, just like eating too much or kind of having bad health habits, like, those things eventually accumulate and add up. It's just like your spending habits. If you don't look at your bank account, you kind of have enough to get there. And then a couple of years down the line, your spending just continually outgrows your earnings. And then you go to swipe your credit card and it gets declined. Like, that's kind of the wake up call. But like, you could have like seen that if it was, you were paying attention to these things. And it's just like people for health, like, you don't gain 10, 15, 20, 30 pounds overnight. It's a gradual accumulation. But like, I've been there before. You look down and you see your stomach and you're like, I used to kind of like have abs, and like, now I just have like a gut. Like, what happened? And that's because like, you're not paying attention, because it doesn't feel good to see things moving in the direction that you don't want them to.
Yeah. So it's sort of like people don't pay attention to things that they know might be cause them pain, right?
Yeah.
And so by virtue of paying attention to it, you know that you have to acknowledge the things that you're doing or not doing that are moving the needle in the wrong direction, which obviously is painful to do. And so what are some strategies that you would employ, or that you help coaches employ, in order to help people start to make progress towards their goals by virtue of just starting to track in some capacity? Like, what are kind of the low-hanging fruit for most people?
Yeah. So I think you kind of hit on one, is like, just having that conversation of like, this is what we're tracking, and like, this is why it's important. Because like, a big part of this is educating your clients and getting them to kind of like understand how the numbers move. And I guarantee, like, in every coach that I've worked with, like, once you get your clients bought into the metrics, like, they're as geeked out on it as you are. Like, they want to see this stuff move. They want to understand kind of what's going on under the hood. So I think the first step is just having the conversation of like, look, like, this is what we're measuring, and like, this is why, and like, this is why it's important to track these things. And like, yes, like, these things don't always move in the right like direction day to day, but we're just trying to get like a general trend. So I think that's kind of step two, is understanding that like, one data point is not finite. Just like waking up one day and you're 5 pounds heavier because you ate Chinese food the day before. That doesn't mean like your entire journey is sabotaged. You want to kind of see a trend over time, and like those things are going to start to build up. And I would say the third is like once you've had that conversation, you're starting to track and you have some education, is just really take bite-sized goals of like how you want to see things move. And
Mm-hmm.
this is true for clients. This is true for business. The easiest way to get discouraged is to misalign your expectations and just set some like huge bombastic goal that is going to be really hard to achieve without breaking that down. Okay, like what does that look like at the week level? What does that look like at the day level? And what am I striving towards? Like for business
Mm-hmm.
owners, it's really easy to go out and say, like, I want to make like $1 million. But then if you're halfway into the year and you've only made $50,000, like unless something crazy happens, you're probably not going to hit $1 million. And then on the
Right.
on the client side, if you're a client, you say like, I want to have like abs in like 6 weeks. If you're not in a position like within striking distance of that, you're setting yourself up for failure, because like it's not just going to be you're going to hit the 5 week mark and be like, dang, I didn't get abs. You're going to hit like week 2 or week 3 and realize that your rate of progress is nowhere close to where you want to
Right.
be. But if you focus really micro, like just week to week, I'm going to lose, like I want to lose 1 pound, or I want to ensure that like my sleep is a 7 out of 10 every day. And you
Mm-hmm.
build habits around that,
Right.
it's really easy to start moving the macro by focusing on the micro.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've observed, and frankly that we struggle with in our business because we are very metric oriented, is I firmly believe that we need to leverage data to help us make informed decisions, right? So that we can set realistic expectations with our clients and of course help them make progress. But one of the things that we observe time and again is I certainly can appreciate your talking about the micro approach is just helping people focus on single habits at a time is because what we see is this idea of overwhelm can become very prominent when we come right out of the gate with you need to track all of your calories. You need to weigh and measure all of your foods. I need you, weighing yourself every day. I need you sleeping 8 hours. You need to make sure you're drinking 100 ounces of water. And it's sort of like, I think people are very easily overwhelmed because it's, seemingly just a lot of stuff to prioritize
Yeah.
in their already busy day-to-day lifestyle. And really the advantage of all of these metrics is really about helping the client identify just their daily behaviors anyways. It's
Mm-hmm.
helping them get introspective on what are the behaviors that they're currently doing that are contributing or not to the goals that we set for them, the habits that we set in place.
Yeah.
And so by virtue of that, having to really kind of scale back and say, and obviously it just depends on the client. There's some hard charging people that are very analytical and ready to go with all of the metrics that you give them. But most people in our experience just aren't ready
Mm-hmm.
necessarily to take everything on, in which case we certainly find a lot of value in just starting with whatever behaviors, whatever metrics could be just drinking enough water on a daily basis, just tracking your sleep, just weighing yourself every single day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just seemingly simple, basic concepts that can help them create more awareness from day to day around their existing behaviors. I realize, I never drink water in the morning. So just waking up and drinking a big glass of water is helping to move the needle, drive momentum, and
Mm-hmm.
then establish more consistency and momentum to start to make better decisions. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
I mean, that makes total sense. And I love how you kind of started with like, it's not just for a lot of people, but like the seemingly simple stuff, like even for advanced people, I think it's good to track like a few things that matter without tracking like everything. Cause like if you track a few things that matter, like it's really easy to understand like how your inputs are affecting your outputs,
Mm-hmm.
which is really kind of this equation we're playing of like, okay, can you drink like 2 more glasses of water per day? Awesome. Now, when you look at that, like, is your energy better? Is your sleep better? Is your mood a little better? Okay, like we know that like hydration is probably an issue for you. Like, let's continue to like exhaust that. And I think far too often for coaches, especially, and for clients, like you just want to jump into like the really sexy stuff.
Mm, right.
For coaches, you can't wait to program like drop sets and like giant sets and like crazy stuff, or get someone carb cycling or doing stuff like all the stuff that you
Right.
geek out on. And then from the client side, you're like, when do we get to have to stop having this conversation about like just eating enough protein?
Totally.
But if you kind of reverse the view on that and say, like, how can I max out the simplest thing possible, then like it's going to go a lot further. And I think like you want to take something to almost close to the point of like diminishing returns, which is basically saying that like for every unit of effort, like what is your return on that unit of effort? And diminishing
Mm-hmm.
returns is when your effort really starts to have a negative or flat return. So if we just focus for you on drinking water, and with every glass of water you drank, you felt a little bit better each day, but around like 10 or 11 glasses of water, you're like,
Yeah,
like I don't really feel any different. Okay, like we
sure.
know that like you're well hydrated, we can move on to the next thing. But as soon as you skip over these little things, it's so much harder because now like you're looking at tons of different stuff. Am I eating enough protein? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I like getting enough water? And
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the thing to zero in on that's kind of like your yes or no. And like the more of those things you max out early on, the longer your progress is going to be, and the less you have to dip into the tank of really sexy stuff, like the harder stuff like cardio or like
Yeah,
very
well,
dynamic training programs. And you can kind of like max the juice out of like that little bit of the fruit.
yeah, no, definitely. And honestly, I think, you said the coaches want to get fancy, but I think the clients want to get fancy too, and they obviously don't need
Mhm.
to. It's like, hey, one of the things I did a Facebook Live yesterday, and it's like one of the best strategies we can do to kind of quote unquote optimize fat loss is basically just do less dumb shit. Right? Is like you don't
Yeah.
have to like intermittent fast or go keto or do time restricted feeding or drink butter coffee or like train 2 times a day or do fasted cardio, like any of this stuff. Like really for probably 99% of the population, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
if you just eat 3 meals a day, if you take responsibility for your intake and track your calories to some degree, right? If you drink enough water, if like you don't try not to snack in between meals and don't drink caffeine too late in the day and so on and so forth. So it's like if we just did less dumb stuff, but we're more consistent with just the fundamentals, just like if we're
Yeah.
learning any type of skill, we're always starting with the fundamentals. And so that's really where it's like time and again we come back to the value of tracking calories, because for us it's like the highest ROI driver, right?
Mhm.
There's the biggest return on investment for people because it gives them the ability to, one, create awareness around their intake, but also understand that, and here's the key when we talk about setting realistic expectations, Zach, is it gives them the understanding that they are allowed to have flexibility and freedom within their calorie intake. Is at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's not about avoiding entire macronutrient groups, but rather it's like, how can you consistently stay within a realistic calorie range for your goals,
Mhm.
regardless of what it is that you're eating, because that gives people autonomy around their food decisions, which it's our belief that that's sort of one of the most powerful drivers of long-term success, right?
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think the what you're like in any change you're trying to make, like you're trying to, like we talked about before, like do the easiest thing. And you want to ensure that I've always remembered there's a line in the 4 Hour Work Week, which is a book that I really took to heart by Tim Ferriss. And he was talking about building a business. And he said, like, decisions I made in the infancy of the business, like made it unscalable and unsellable and kind of like screwed me long term.
Mm,
And what you want to look at, how I perceive that for a lot of things, is you want to ensure that the solution you're implementing can scale and grow with you. And if you start out with something or diet wise that like it is effective but very restrictive,
mm-hmm.
like what does that look like 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, when life happens and flexibility opens back up and you like you're not as kind of like rigid and focused, you start to relapse. And that's why Luke Lehman had a really good post about this. One of the guys I talked to a bit, and he was like, we don't have a fat loss issue. He was like, we have a maintenance issue. He was like, a lot of people, he was like, losing fat for a lot of people is not the problem,
Right.
but keeping that off, like only 5% of dieters, I believe, ever actually keep the weight off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because, like you said, like you're choosing a tool that may be sustainable for some people, but it's not for you. So I think like tracking calories, I agree, is such a good place because it gives you a lot of movement and flexibility of where you want to go. And it's also one of those keystone habits that really starts to drive awareness around your decision making. I've got an Oura ring sitting over there charging, and all it really does is tell me my sleep and my
Right.
heart rate variability. But I can tell you that like that tiny tool and like learning those two data points has gotten me to change a lot of my habits. I drink significantly less than I did a few years ago,
Yeah.
just because you know and understand that. And it's the same thing with you tracking your macros and tracking your calories. If you kind of understand the ramifications of your decisions, you can therefore go out and make better decisions. So like maybe it's not worth like eating an entire sleeve of Oreos, no matter how delicious you are, because like one, you know how that makes you feel, but two, you know how kind of like off base that is and how like
Right.
how long it takes to get back on track after that.
Yeah, and it just completely eliminates this need for having an all or nothing mindset. Is like
Mm-hmm.
you can have two Oreos and you can still have it fit within your calorie ceiling and still work towards your goals as opposed to having two Oreos say, screw it, I ate quote unquote bad food and I might as well just eat the rest of the sleeve. And because I did that, I might as well just, you know, to eat shitty for the entire weekend and start again
Yeah.
Monday, which, surprisingly, that's the mentality that a lot of people have around it. And obviously it's our mission to start to shift that. Now, despite the fact that we can acknowledge here that there's so much value in tracking metrics, specifically tracking calories. What would you say to people that are having a hard time or feel like it's unrealistic for them, or just simply perhaps having a hard time prioritizing it um, into their lifestyle? How would you approach that?
Start with the simplest thing you can and scale up. So if you kind of look at like fully tracking macros as
Mm,
being like the pinnacle of that. So
yeah,
like ideally, like the pinnacle is like you're tracking your macros, you're hitting your macros plus or minus like 5 grams. Like that is like the all-star LeBron James type level,
right.
but like anyone can get there with practice. Like you want to scale that back as close as you can and just like, how can I start to create awareness around my decisions? Whether
Mhm.
that's taking pictures of your food to start, whether that is like portion sizes I know are super common for a lot of people, just to bring awareness around, okay, like roughly how much protein am I getting, carbs, fat, like start
Yeah.
to put a ballpark around it and you can scale up. And I think from there, like I'm sure you run through with like your clients and other coaches do, then maybe it's just tracking like one or two variables. Like
Mhm.
start by tracking just your calories. And then you can look at your macros kind of after the fact and say, like, how did things shake out? Like,
Yeah.
am I eating a lot of protein? Oh, wow. Like a lot of my diet is like fat, or a lot of my
Mhm.
diet is carbs, or like one of those two. And then you can scale up. So I think like starting smaller and then doing like a protein calories approach is super like, I think super popular. And then from there, when you're kind of ready to track more stuff and start to hit more stuff, you can start to like, you've already built confidence, you know how to track, you kind of know how to understand it. And like then it's kind of from going from like wading in the water to like now you're kind of going to push off and you're going to swim into the deep end a little bit and see how it goes. And there are kind of learning curves with each of those. But with anything you do, like start so small that it would be really hard to screw up.
Yeah.
And then like as you build confidence with yourself, you're like, yeah, like I've got this, I can do it. Then you can expand things. But I think you're spot on where people get in a lot of trouble. We talked to this with goal setting, is when you start too big because you think that like, oh, like I'm a pro, I've done this before. And then it becomes so overwhelming that you
Hmm.
don't want to do it. Like all
Yeah.
of this is just a tool to get you where you want to go. But like if you're unable to use the tool does you no good.
100%, man. And this is good because this conversation is actually forcing me to reflect on a lot of the things that we currently do in our business and perhaps that we can be doing better is despite the fact that we rely heavily on calorie tracking as a very valuable metric for client success. By that same token, is if it's something that's creating an overwhelming level, overwhelm with our client,
Mm-hmm.
and they're getting turned off because of it and unresponsive and uncommunicative because they're feeling like they're incapable of it or it's too advanced of a skill, then it's doing the exact opposite
Yeah.
of what we want it to do. And so for coaches listening, perhaps that's valuable for you, is to say, listen, it's not the end all be all for everything. At least that's been our observation working with hundreds and hundreds of clients over the years. And still in a position where we like to believe that we have a lot of success with our clients, but at the same time, there's still a large percentage of clients that aren't getting the results that they want or we want for them. And we're only human, and this is still behaviors, right? This is still
Yeah.
psychology, and it's not all about numbers. And at the same time, for the client, Zach um, is is having permission to be okay with it's too it feels too overwhelming right now.
Mhm.
What's something that I can do that doesn't feel as daunting? What's something that I can confidently commit to, even if it's just drinking a glass of water every single morning? And one of the things my wife has been doing consistently that's really helping her drive momentum is like she's committed to going to bed by 9:30,
Mhm.
getting up at 6:30, going for a walk. And it's just like those two habits right there, by stacking those, are really contributing to driving momentum for the rest of the day, to want
Yeah.
her wanting to, right, to do more and more. So I'm glad that we have the chance to talk through this because, well, selfishly, it's helpful for me in our business.
Yeah. I think one thing, like you called out the word mindsets, or mindset. There's a really good podcast I just listened to with Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Leah Crum, both out of Stanford, I believe.
Yeah.
And she talked about like she has a ton of research around like mindsets. So I think until I heard this like podcast, I think you hear the word mindset as a
Mhm.
singular word as kind of like your mindset around things. Are you a growth mindset person or fixed mindset person? Like, do you think you can change? Do you think you're kind of stuck? But I think when she starts talking about mindsets, she even gave kind of a diet example. They had people come in and drink a shake. And the
Yeah.
shake was the same for both cohorts, but the way they described the shake, either being a lean diet shake
Right.
or a like a very rich and hearty shake, actually had a direct metabolic response on the hormone leptin, I believe, and
Mhm.
like how full those people got, even though they shake with the exact same way. Now, you can take that as far as like kind of coining like there really are no bad foods, but your perception around those foods can
Yeah.
actually drive like, I probably believe like positive and negative metabolic ramifications. I think we'll probably see some really cool research on that down the line. But I think even your mindsets around tracking, around like goal setting,
Yeah.
around being an all or nothing person, I think that like so many people have these definitive beliefs or definitive mindsets about things that they picked up along the way that like don't really serve them. And then you get
Hmm.
into a position where you're like, well, I'm an all or nothing person. So therefore, like, I already had the sleeve of Oreos. Like, let's grab a sixer of craft beer, order a Domino's
Right.
pizza, and like make this a weekend. So I
Yeah.
think
That
that like
sounds
one of the
great.
things coaches can do around that as well is like when you're starting to see these things, like talking about like the mindsets and beliefs around some of these patterns to get them bought into using the tool. If you change your mindsets and beliefs to like, I'm somebody who like enjoys tracking and like understanding things so I can get towards my goal, then like you start to see this as a tool. Cause like that's all these things are.
Hmm.
Like if you could lose weight by standing on your head for 60 seconds a day, then like I'd probably recommend that to a lot of people. Like be very, I think, fixed in your destination, like understand where you want to go, but be flexible in the route or tool to get there. There are going to be some people that do really well with just tracking portion size, and there's some people that love to go all in. There are going to be some people who love the way they feel on low carb, and there are going to be some people who want a more flexible approach. But like just understanding that, like, you know where you want to go, looking at all the things around that, your mindset's beliefs around, like around how you want to get there, and being flexible and understanding the different tools you use and not being like negative or demonizing one or really putting one on a pedestal. Cause like at the end
Hmm.
of the day, like maybe they have more or less efficacy based on what they are, but they're all just kind of tools in the tool shed to get you where you want to go.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And like we said earlier, it's just so much of this lends itself to identifying what behaviors you're doing or not doing that are contributing to the outcomes that you're experiencing. Is like, again, the calories aren't the end all be all, but it's by virtue of tracking that you really become aware of your day-to-day behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And then therefore helps you be more consistent with those, right? And so I think that that's really important. And then for the coach to really have that conversation with the client and say, well, why is it that you're feeling so resistant to the tracking process?
Yeah.
What is your perception of this, and so on and so forth. So I think that's great. So tell us, and let's kind of jump into how you've leveraged this idea of metrics tracking into now being rooted in health and fitness. Like, what are you doing with those now?
Yeah. So I founded a company called Duxata, which if you want a quick back step on the name, naming a company is inherently more difficult than I thought, and was going through how Venmo did it. And it was this Latin root of spend on something that sounded cool. So my thing has always been like very data driven. So like Dux is the Latin root for to guide. And I was like, well, Dux and then data. I was like, that just sounds funny. So like we're going to chop the D off and do an A. And the big thing is to like allow coaches to guide with data. And I think I wanted to solve a few main problems that I saw in the coaching world with this. Number one, a lot of coaches hit glass ceilings with probably between like 30 and 50 people, depending on like how robust you are or how much effort you want to put into it. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me because when I looked at what we were doing at Uber and we were scaling things of like having one person manage 500 people or 500 restaurants, I was like, there's a way for this to do, like, for us to do something similar here. So like, how do we set that up? So I wanted to give coaches a way, not just to manage more clients, but to deliver them better results as well. And when I looked at like everything I'd done with Uber, with kind of help scaling out some of the stuff for global strategy, we were doing some pretty cool stuff around one-to-many management for restaurants and really getting them focused on a subset of metrics that you could look at over the course of time to see who do I need to give more attention to. So what I want to do for coaches was, one, allow them to easily collect all the metrics of progress, which is really how compliant are you in nutrition? How compliant are you in habits? And then the big markers of biofeedback, sleep, stress, energy, mood, and focus, and combine those with progress pictures, with measurements, with weekly check-ins, because like subjective data is data too, and allow them to look at that in one snapshot so you could see, okay, like here's all of my data. Here's everything going on. Here's a complete picture of the client. What do I do next? And it really, when you aggregate everything and kind of streamline it, it allows the coach to take something that took 30 minutes plus of an hour to like talk to somebody and like see what's going on and like get them to update their stuff. So now you can like actually do a client check-in, which is giving them their macros, giving them their habits, giving them any notes for the next week to succeed in under 60 seconds. And if you're able to do a client check-in in under 60 seconds, the amount of clients you as a coach can help is significantly greater. And the other important thing is to have a coach, I always have access to somebody's data, then I can see things moving through the course of the week. And I don't have to wait until the next time we check in to say something. I think a big pitfall with coaching is like, there's a lot that can happen between Sunday and Sunday, or if you have 2-week check-ins, like there's a lot that can happen in 2 weeks. Definitely. And like things can go off the rails. People don't want to say anything. But if you as a coach can see like, hey, Ben, like your sleep hasn't been great the past 3 nights, and I can see that in your data, like what's going on? Like, how do we step ahead of that? And you're taking something, like I said, to where you don't want that client's expectations to ever get off track. And you're keeping them in those real thin bowling lanes and bumpers to where they never deviate too far off. And they always feel like they're making progress. From a client side, you're getting better service, you're getting better like strategy, you're getting better care. And from the coaching side, you don't have to worry about clients churning, and you can manage more clients as a result.
Yeah, man. And that's huge. And certainly something that we've talked a lot about over the last several months. And certainly a problem that we're experiencing in our business is, how do we continue to grow? How do we continue to serve clients at the highest level and track progress and all of these metrics that we're having clients pay attention to, while still be able to give them effective protocols, so to speak. Yeah. And really what I appreciate from it, and that I'm excited about with respect to the app, is it sounds like it's covering really from the lowest denominator to the highest level, in terms of, even if it's just, like we said, even if it's just a seemingly simple habit of like, listen, checking in weekly, tracking your water intake on a daily basis, and perhaps your steps, all the way to full macro distribution, circumference measurements, and whatever is, we can hold the client accountable, and the client can feel accountable, and they can feel supported through the process, regardless of what level of skill they have developed up to that point. It's not either you're tracking everything or nothing, and we don't have a way to kind of identify variables in between.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And then from the client side, like it was really important to me to give clients access to all the data the coaches had. Because like I said, anyone that I've worked with when I was coaching, and the coaches I've worked with, like once you're a client, you start to see that, like you start to geek out on the progress too. And like we were sitting on the couch and I was like talking to my fiance, and she was trying to like compare her body comp pictures using some random app. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if your clients can do that? And then we just made a feature for that. So you can look at your body comp pictures from like 6 weeks ago and now, and see like, maybe the scale hasn't moved, but like, damn, my waist looks good.
Yeah, no. That's great. And I think that the client has to feel empowered into the process. and really a part of the process, and really get the same sort of focus that the coach has of understanding of the metrics.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, when you've been coaching long enough, and I'm sure any coaches listening can appreciate this, it becomes so much more than just the weekly weight averages, the daily weight, the weekly macros or calorie averages, but it's really giving you the opportunity to zoom out and paint a picture
Mhm.
of ultimately what does all of this mean to the behaviors that the client's practicing, right?
Yeah.
And that is where the rubber meets the road, and you can really do remarkable things as a coach, um, to help the client in areas where they may not realize that they're struggling for. And I'll just give you a quick example, and then we'll wrap it up. But I was doing a check-in for a client the other day, and one of the reasons I like to have data is, she was submitting her calories and her macronutrients on a weekly basis. And, we obviously see scale weight averages on a weekly basis.
Mhm.
And she was expressing a little bit of frustration around why scale weight wasn't moving. She was hitting her calories. She was staying within her calories. She was hitting her macros within reason. She was in a supposed calorie deficit. Nothing's moving on the scale. Now, from a coaching standpoint, I know her well enough to kind of know, okay, obviously on paper, that's one thing to say, well, theoretically, things should be changing.
Mhm.
Instead of me automatically adjusting her calories, the conversation became, really, how accurate are you actually being with your calorie intake? Do we need to audit your weighing and measuring process? Are you actually weighing and measuring? How much of these foods were consumed at home versus eating out?
Yeah.
How structured were your meals? How much single ingredient food were you consuming? And this is where I think it's so important for us to not get lost in the numbers, but
Mhm.
really leverage those as opportunities to create more connection with our clients, create more discussion and more coaching, to really start to understand and help the client understand all of the nuances involved.
Yeah. No, I think 100%, man. It should be a great experience for coach and client. For coach, like you should feel good about the work you're doing. It should be easy to manage clients, and like you should feel like you have all the tools at your disposal to be empowered. But from the client side, the same thing. Like this shouldn't be something where you dread the process.
Yeah.
And I think the better you understand it, the better you see that you're making progress, the more things you can look at to say, okay, like sleep's going up, like digestion's going up. We can start
Mm-hmm.
to quantify that. And we touched on like the subjective stuff. I think it's really important to keep kind of a log of like, what are your wins each week? What do you see as your opportunities?
Right.
Because like the more a client gets educated in that, like you have kind of like it's the inflection point every coach goes through it where the client starts driving the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it becomes something to like, and it always gets me so excited because like it's no longer you kind of like guiding them through. It's them saying like, hey, like this is what happened. Like
Totally.
here's what the data shows. Like here's why it says that. Like here's kind of what I'm thinking for
Right.
next time. And it turns coaching into this kind of one way thing where you're trying to lead a horse to water and you're trying to keep on the straight and narrow to like now it's a collaboration of ideas. And when you get in that collaborative environment, it feels so good from the client side to kind of like be voicing your opinion, to like have that click. And then on the coaching side, it makes your job exponentially easier because the client is bought in, they're recommending things, and they're really becoming somebody who's taking control of their own journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so So if you're a client, if you're a prospective client, if you're someone that's interested in nutrition and health and fitness, or gaining muscle, losing body fat, and you're not paying attention to any of these variables, any of these metrics that we're talking about, or you're working with a coach and they're not paying attention to any of those, well, you probably should be, and so should they. So I would start doing that. And if you were a coach, and obviously you're not paying attention to these variables with your clients, well, as a fellow coach, I would strongly encourage that you start doing that if you want the best results for your clients, in whatever capacity that looks like. Of course, Zach, tell us just briefly a little bit more about the app and how they can find out more, get on the wait list. Tell us like what's going on with that.
Yeah, so the app is at duxata.com, Duxata. From there, you can see screenshots, workflows. You can also sign up for a demo call. So at the point of this call, I'm doing demos. So if you book that in, I'll walk you through the tool. We'll see if it's a good fit for you and your business. And then, like I kind of said before, like the tool really allows you as a coach to coach more clients in less time with better results by like having all the data at your disposal, understanding that data, and then be able to check a client in with that in under 60 seconds.
How is this different from any of the other trackers, habit tracker apps on the market right now?
Yeah, so I think the big differences are a few fold. One is I'm a strong believer in what I call proactive client management. So having all of your numbers at your disposals so you can see how clients are moving over the course of days and weeks, so you can reach out ahead of time before the check-in. Number two is it's the only thing on the market that I've seen. It has like all of your data in one place. So you can easily see the trends. You can see kind of red light, green light, how your clients are doing. And then you as the coach can assess their progress. Are they on track to hit their goal? Do they need attention? Are they off track? And it's the ultimate tool as a coach to allow you to prioritize. And you can instantly get a handle on, okay, I'm going to pull up Ben. Here's Ben's numbers. Here's Ben's progress. Here's what we should do next. And it makes the decision making for you as a tool, like as a coach, simple because like you know what to do, but it's really having all that data at your disposal and having it aggregated in a way that you can easily understand it that separates this from any of the other coaching tools out there.
Yep. It's awesome. And obviously there's a systematic process to it, which both for the client and the coach is imperative to continued progress. And it's all good and well when it's just starting out and you're all excited and motivated, but it's really important that you have a structured system of attack week in and week out, especially when things start to get hard, especially when there's road bumps along the way. And you really need to lean into those behaviors that you've been developing over weeks and months that are going to push you through without losing the progress that you've worked so hard for. And that's where systems like this can really come into play. So, Zach, I'm super excited for the app. By the time this podcast comes out, it should be up on the market in some capacity.
Live.
Yeah, so I'm really excited for that to test it out, share it with other clients and coaches. Yeah, brother, just want to thank you so much for your time. It's been very insightful.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, man. I think anytime, like, I love beating the drum on this just because this is like where I came from, where I grew up. But I think like if you're listening to this, whether you're a coach, whether you're a client, like really figuring out what matters to you and then what are the things you can do to see if you're making progress towards those. Even if they're small, even if you think they're insignificant, the more of a picture you can start to put together of your progress, the more motivated you're going to be. And the better you're going to be able to assess how to take the next step. Like that's all kind of life is. We're trying to figure out where we are, where we want to be and how to get there. And these metrics and these tools are really just a subset of those things to help you get where you want to go in a faster amount of time. So you can really achieve the things you want to achieve, have the life you want to have and live the way you want to live.
Yeah, and in the easiest, most seemingly simple way possible while still getting the results that you're looking for. And from a coaching standpoint, what better than doing what we love to do in a way that doesn't have to feel as overwhelming as we often make it for ourselves. And for me, that's been one of the most powerful things that I've learned from you over the last year or so of consuming your content is really how to start to leverage the structure, these systems, and really kind of key metrics of success and leveraging those to help move my business forward in the most appropriate way. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing all this information. Super excited for the app to come out. So I'll keep you guys, our listeners, updated on that, and we'll catch up soon, brother.
Thanks for having me on.
Take care.